This week on Motoring 90.
This area, the median is very narrow, and yes, we've had a lot of cross-median accidents.
Racing last year, basically our team spent a little over $300,000. So it's not a cheap sport, but it certainly is breathtaking to watch.
Motoring 90 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will.
This week we find ourselves alongside Highway 401 that runs between the Ontario-Quebec border and the city of Windsor. Now this particular stretch links Trenton with Kingston. It's about 100 kilometers. Well, over the past few years there has been an alarming increase in traffic fatalities. And although it's important to determine the cause of each accident, there is a definite pattern emerging. And it's a pattern that all drivers should be aware of across this country. We'll look into that later on. But first, we're going to join Steve Grant. And Steve tells me he was at the races this past week. He was quite pleased to tell me he didn't get wet. Here's Steve to explain.
Usually when we cover motorsports on Motoring 90, we find ourselves in Gasoline Alley, or at least surrounded by cars. Well, this week's something a little different. We find ourselves at a boat race. But these aren't just your average boats. These are Formula One outboard power boats. They're equipped with V8 3-liter engines, and believe it or not, they can produce as much as 450 horsepower. The Formula Ones are also known as tunnel boats. They literally fly on air captured and compressed in a tunnel running the length of the hull.
Well, driving one of these boats is similar to teetering a teeter-totter. We have trim, which enables us to bring the bow up and down as we're driving. So the boat compresses air into the tunnel. So what we do with the trim is the more air we compress at a higher speed, we trim in to keep the boat on the water. If we didn't have the trim, it would just eventually blow over backwards.
The speedboats haven't caught on in Canada to the extent they have in the States, but you can't help but appreciate the skill involved in piloting one of these water rockets.
Well, you have to take everything into consideration. It's not like your NASCAR, your Indy cars, where you've got a given track and the ground's there and what have you. If you take a basketball, for instance, bounce it once, it'll bounce back to you in your hands. If you throw a basketball in water, it just hits and it stays there. So every corner's different, every little puff of wind you get is different. It's always something different. You've just got to find the edge where you're flying, but you're not totally flying. You've got a bit of the boat in the water.
Rob Wood is the defending Canadian champion. He and 8 others are preparing to take on the choppy waters of Lake Ontario.
You're ready, we'll shove you off.
I think you want to be started.
The course is only 1.5 miles, but these boats are capable of speeds of up to 150 miles per hour on the straightaways.
Like anything over 40 is fast on water, so 150 miles an hour, it's really hauling. So it's just on the edge, you're just clipping along. It's a real surge. It's all relative, put it that way. If you've got, 10 boats traveling at that speed, everything's relative. Everything's within 5-10 miles an hour. It's not too difficult. It's not so much looking at your pontoons, it's more of a feel. Different boats. There's second effort boats where you can actually look down and see your sponsons. My boat, which is much more difficult to drive in my eyes because it's carbon fiber, it's not wooden, and Kevlar, and it's basically a feel. You have to feel it. So if you can't feel it, you shouldn't be driving it. So if you can feel it, you're all right.
Now, maybe it's just me, but you have to question the sanity of anyone who would even think of going that fast with only fiberglass and a life jacket between you and the water.
Well, I know. I still look at bike drivers. I still think they're crazy. So you see these race bike drivers. So I know we've got a fair bit of protection in these now. We've got a 5-point harness in it, and in the capsules, so they're carbon fiber and Kevlar. So they have made several safety measures. I've had a few accidents in the past, blowovers and barrel rolls, and I'm bruised up a bit. But safety is there as well.
Ole Burkus got to kiss the girls this time, but he had to work for it thanks to an extremely rough lake.
Well, to start with, this is first race of the year, I haven't been on the boat since last October, and also it was rougher than hell. The water was unbelievable. Well, my body can take it. The boat can't take it. That's the problem. Also, I heal pretty damn fast. The boat costs a lot of bucks to put it back together.
This new engine produces a healthy 190 horsepower, and during the acceleration test managed to motivate the Mazda to 100 kilometers an hour in a tick under 10 seconds.
Test Drive with Graham Fletcher.
This week on Test Drive, we're looking at the Mazda 929S. Now, not only will we be putting the new 24-valve 4-cam V6 through its paces, but we'll also be having a look at something Mazda called Kansei engineering. That, simply put, is the relationship between man and machine. The Mazda 929S still presents a conservative picture to the public, unlike the competition, most of whom have taken a more flamboyant approach to style. I asked an owner of a 929 why the conservative style appealed to him. His answer? All the luxury and technical sophistication he wanted in a package that didn't stick out like a sore thumb when in a parking lot or out on the highway. He has a point, but for me the style is still way too staid. Mazda's auto-adjusting suspension system allows the driver to select 3 different shock settings: Sport, Soft and Auto. With the suspension set in the Sport mode, the 929 traversed the pylon course well, managing to retain a flat attitude throughout. The Soft mode allows a lot of body roll, but does improve the ride comfort considerably. The Auto mode tended to hold the soft setting too long, meaning the transition to the firmer Sport mode came a little too late, hindering rather than helping the overall handling characteristics. This year's S model features a 24-valve 4-cam 3-litre V6 in place of last year's 16-valve unit. Increasing the number of valves increases the engine's ability to breathe, equating to a faster, fitter unit. This new engine produces a healthy 190 horsepower, and during the acceleration test managed to motivate the Mazda to 100 kilometers an hour in a tick under 10 seconds. Mazda's ABS system features ventilated discs all round. The vents ensure better heat dissipation. During the tests, we recorded consistently short stops averaging 107 feet from 80 kilometers an hour. Part of Mazda's design criteria includes something called Kansei engineering. This portion of the vehicle's design is, as the current ad implies, to ensure the car feels just right. In many respects, the designers have hit the bullseye. The elegant interior offers a full complement of power options as well as leather upholstery and heated seats. The front seats themselves provide plenty of comfort and, to my surprise, a lot of lateral support. The automatic climate control system features swiveling air vents that swing back and forth, improving the air circulation. And as you might expect, the 929 boasts a top-line stereo that features a pre-programmed graphic equalizer. So where did they miss? The digital instrumentation. It, as usual, is a big disappointment. This week I have a couple of minor pet peeves that detracted from what otherwise is a superb automobile. Firstly, the passenger side seat track travel is somewhat limited, which gives rise to an uncomfortable passenger. Secondly, the way they've got the driving lights wired just isn't very good at all. Anyway, now to the scoreboard for the final rating of the 1919 Mazda 929S. When the Sport mode is selected, the 929 weaved its way through the pylons with great aplomb. The other 2 settings were just too soft. However, get out on the highway and the soft mode does come into its own. Another superb ABS system and another superb set of results from the brake test. The only surprise is that the anti-lock brakes are an optional extra. In a car like the 929, they should be a standard feature. The new multi-valve V6 certainly hustles along when all 190 horsepower are online. The 9.8 second time we recorded does not do the car justice, because it does feel a lot quicker than it proved to be. All in all, a reasonably quiet car. Only a slight amount of wind noise from the front windows disturbed what otherwise is a peaceful environment. We managed to average 11.2 litres per 100 kilometres or 25 miles per gallon, which for a large, powerful sedan is reasonably good. The 929 offers all the luxury and technical sophistication anyone could want. It's a shame that the appearance is not as exciting. Hardly a single passerby stopped to give the car a second look, perhaps because in appearance it is just too much like the 626.
Well, as you can see, you find all sorts of trucks, shapes and sizes, at a truck stop. And aren't you glad this one's on a trailer and not in front of you? All right, it's now time to leave the truck stop and join our chief mechanic on Motoring 90, Bill Gardiner.
Last week we talked about how to do a minor service on a disc brake caliper while it's still assembled on the car, the kind of thing you would do if you were just fitting new brake pads. But this week we're going to talk about how to repair or rebuild a disc brake caliper if it becomes seized. That's quite often the case in our environment. It's a very harsh environment, and these calipers tend to get seized up. This one, the bleeder screw, is seized. These bushings that allow the caliper to cross-slide are stuck and seized in their bores. The piston is badly rusted, and there's a lot of corrosion in the caliper bore. So this one has just about every defect that you could have with a caliper. We'll remove the piston, and you can see a large buildup of rust in this area. That's where the boot has to seal the piston, and it should be squeaky clean in that area. Over here it's a little bit better, but you can see a lot of rust and scale in this area. That piston's not reusable. Also, these bushings that should push out easily by hand are stuck, and I can't get them out easily. So we're going to have to use a hammer and a punch to drive them out. They should just come out with thumb pressure when everything's working properly. We're going to have to use a torch to heat this area in order to remove the bleeder screw without breaking it in the caliper. And we're going to have a look in the caliper bore, and we can see in this one there's an awful lot of rust inside that bore, and that has caused our piston to seize, and the car was pulling badly to one side. Now if you have a caliper problem with your car, a seized caliper, you're going to have some kind of a pull. The likelihood is that as you're driving or coasting, the car will pull towards the bad caliper. If it was the right front, it'll coast or pull to the right-hand side of the road. When you apply the brakes, it'll pull the other way. It'll pull to the left because the left caliper is probably okay, and it pulls towards that strong one. The right one is seized up and it can't apply. So that's the rule of thumb. Coasting or driving, it goes towards the bad caliper. When you apply the brakes, it pulls away from the bad caliper. Now if you buy a rebuilt exchange caliper, it'll come all cleaned up and it'll be nice and pretty looking. This one we've just honed out and cleaned in the critical areas where it needs to perform. The rest of this is going to be awful messy looking as soon as you put it back on the car anyway, so we haven't worried about those other areas. But we have honed out the caliper bore. You can see that it's nice and shiny inside, and the area where the dust boot and seal go, and we've cleaned out these 4 areas where the rubber grommets go. We've also heated the caliper up and removed that seized bleeder screw, and we're going to install a new bleed screw as well when we rebuild it. We'll put it in the vise to secure it, and we'll try our caliper piston for fit in the bore, and you can see that it slides in nice and easily now. It's a nice slip fit in the bore. Prior to this, it was seized in all that rust we showed you earlier. Now, the next thing to do is we're going to install the dust boot. It's a friction fit in the caliper bore, so we need a driving tool and a hammer. And we drop it into place and give it a tap to fully seat it. Okay, we've got the dust boot installed squarely in the bore. The next thing to do is install the piston seal. It's a square section seal. And we're lubing it up with some caliper assembly fluid. And we'll tuck it into its groove in the caliper bore. And we're going to have to use some more of that caliper assembly fluid to lube the caliper bore and the piston so that they'll go in easily without tearing the dust boot or piston seal. Now we have to put a bit of that caliper assembly fluid on the nose of the piston as well so that it'll start into the boot properly. It's a bit of a trick to install. We have to hold the piston down into the boot gently and lift the boot up. I'm using a dentist tool here, and one end of it has a nice rounded end that won't tear the boot. And I lift the boot up all the way around the piston like this till it's up the side of the piston, and then we pull the piston down in with our fingers, and if everything's done properly, I should be able to pull it in with my fingers. You shouldn't have to force it in or hammer it or anything like that. That one just went in just nicely. We're also going to replace this small grommet in the outboard side of the caliper. It's kind of hard to get in because the bore that it fits into is awful small. We have to push it down in there and then guide it into position with the tool. We've already lubed up the other new grommets, and we're going to slide in the new bushings. And you can see they go in very easily. Remember a few minutes ago we had to hammer the old ones out, and that's how easily they should move in order for the caliper to cross slide properly. The last thing to be done is to install the new bleeder screw in here, and we're going to tighten it down for now. Later on we'll have to bleed the brakes after we reinstall this caliper on the vehicle. Another important thing is to install a rubber bleeder port cap on that screw when you're finished. That's going to keep all the dirt and water from infiltrating that bleeder screw and seizing up your caliper bleeders. Till next week, I'm Bill Gardiner for Motoring 90.
We're traveling on Highway 401, located between Trenton and Kingston, Ontario. Now, at first glance, it looks like any other highway in this country. But as we're about to discover, this particular stretch is very quickly becoming a killer strip. The number of fatal accidents along this 100-kilometer strip has increased at a frightening pace. In 1986, for example, 2 motorists lost their lives. The following year, the death count rose to 14, and it continues to climb. The 401 is patrolled by the Ontario Provincial Police. The Belleville detachment is responsible for the Trenton-Kingston area. 32-year veteran Sergeant Sid Kane is on the scene for all fatalities. He admits it's difficult to pinpoint the cause of each accident, but a definite pattern is beginning to develop.
Probably the average accident we have here is a single car rollover that occurs during a weekday in good weather and good road conditions. All of these people in the last year have either been from Montreal or Toronto. This is just about the halfway point. It may be drowsiness, it may be just lack of concentration after they get out of the heavy traffic flows in Montreal and Toronto, and they just don't pay as much attention when they get to this area. There were 24 deaths on this stretch of highway last year in 11 accidents. So you can see some of them were certainly multiple fatalities. 15 of them were caused by ejections. And of the 24, 23 of them were not wearing their seatbelts. The majority of these are occurring during daylight hours in good weather.
Those are perfect conditions, though.
That's right. So the cause is somewhere, it's driver error 99% of the time. It appears that they're dropping off the shoulder of the road and overcorrecting, causing a rollover. That would be the normal accident.
Shocked by the death rate, the Ministry of Transportation released a study that revealed a disturbing similarity to the highway fatalities.
The majority of the fatalities have very bad driving records. It's rare to find an accident, a fatality on 401 highway in which the driver has a clean record.
I'm standing on the median separating the east and westbound lanes of Highway 401. As we have learned, vehicles are losing control on the shoulders of the road, oversteering, and then they are catapulted across this median into the path of oncoming traffic.
Well, of the 17 crashes that have been being looked at now that happened on this stretch of the 401, virtually all of them were to do with dropping 2 wheels on the shoulder of the road. They were single car crashes and collisions.
Gary Magwood is one of Canada's foremost driver educators, and he has some advice for drivers who suddenly find themselves off the road.
Get off the gas. The moment you get on that shoulder, you can drive from here to Montreal, 2 wheels in the gravel, 2 wheels in the pavement. But you have to get the vehicle stabilized. So the moment you get on the shoulder, if your reaction is just to latch onto the steering, get off the gas, stay off the brakes, don't touch the pedals. Let the vehicle stabilize itself. When you're ready and comfortable, never mind the noise and the rattling. When you're comfortable, look in your mirror, pop your turn signal on, and a tiny amount of steering will put you back on the road.
I really don't see any difference between this stretch of highway and anywhere else that I've driven. And, you know, you got courteous people and you have incourteous people.
It's being said that since this stretch of highway is between Montreal and Toronto, 2 hours either way, the 2 hours is about the limit for any driver before his mind begins to wander. As a truck driver, as a man who spends a lot of time on the highway, how do you feel about that?
I would disagree with it, personally. I stop every 2 hours because my company demands that I stop every 2 hours, and the law demands that I stop every 2 hours for a tire check. But I've driven from Montreal to Bothwell non-stop.
When you get tired, what do you do?
When I get tired, I look for a parking place. I go to bed for a while.
No, I can just keep on driving. It doesn't even bother me. I just keep on driving. I don't get tired. Not at all. Nope.
You know, after 3 or 4 hours of driving, I start getting tired.
Have you ever seen people in front of you who obviously are a little tired and they begin to go off the road?
I'm not sure if I've actually seen that, but I've seen cars in the ditch along the way, and I can see what's happened to them. It's because they're tired.
Basically, you just see the bad driving, making the poor judgments and making bad mistakes, or maybe not making mistakes, but just taking risks that it's not necessary to take. Tailgating and improper lane change, that sort of thing. It's about a 2-hour trip. After that length of time, you may well lose your concentration. Maybe you should break your trip up and get out and have a coffee or do something like that.
Next on Kenzie's Corner, the Audi alarm clock, and it only costs about $70,000.
Kenzie's Corner with Jim Kenzie.
This is the 401 highway just north of Toronto. It's the second busiest highway in all of North America, second only to the Santa Monica Freeway near Los Angeles. And yet for the hundreds and thousands of cars that go by this road every day, this is not the most dangerous part of the 401. That dubious distinction belongs to the stretch of highway near Belleville, Kingston, and Gananoque, where they killed over 40 people last year alone. Now, why should this particular stretch of road be more dangerous than any other? Well, part of the reason might be that it's about 2 hours east of Toronto, it's about 2 hours west of Montreal, and it's also 2 hours south of Ottawa. Are we starting to see a pattern here, folks? Well, the people that make this Audi V8 think there is a pattern. They've got a computer in the car which flashes 2 hours when you've been driving for that long. Research indicates that the first thing that goes on a driver isn't his legs like a hockey player, but his eyes. When you get tired, your vision starts to drop, you fail to see the big picture, and you get hypnotized by the white lines disappearing under your front bumper. So next time you're on a long trip, take a tip either from your car or from your own wristwatch. After about 2 hours, stop at the next service center. Have a coffee, walk around the car for a few minutes. It'll only delay you for a few minutes, but it might just save your life. This is Jim Kenzie for Motoring 90.
Thank you very much. You know, I guess we all have our own methods of staying refreshed and wide awake while driving. Mine? It's a good cup of coffee. That's it. We'll see you next week. And until then, make sure you drive safely, okay? Stay awake.
Motoring 90 is brought to you by Quaker State. The big Q stands for quality. Always has, always will.